What's up, Sagi here, and welcome to another Tech Gear Talk. The iPad 8 is probably the best value that you can get at this price point. But a question that a lot of people have is, how much memory do you really need, and what's going to be enough for what you plan on doing? So today we're going to talk about these questions, cover the different use cases of what you might be doing with this iPad, and I'll help you choose the right option for you. If you're buying the Wi-Fi only version, then you're looking at $329 for the 32GB model or $429 for the 128GB model. If you want to add cellular, then you're adding $130 to either options. Now, to keep things simple, I'm mostly going to talk about the Wi-Fi only prices so that I don't have to repeat myself. So starting out and looking at a simple price per gigabyte breakdown with the 32GB model, we're looking at $10.28 per gigabyte of storage. With the 128GB version, which is what I have, we're looking at $3.35. So that's slightly less of a third of the price. So clearly, if you're just looking at the lowest cost per gigabyte, you should go with the 128. But before you do that, let's see if you actually need it, because it's only truly a better value if you use it. Otherwise, you're just wasting $100. Now, there's one thing that people forget when they start thinking about how much internal storage they need. The iPad doesn't come empty. And there are two things to consider here: the actual system files and pre-installed apps. So each iPad OS takes up a little more storage than the previous one, and the current one uses about 6.3 gigabytes for system and 1.5 gigabytes for other. So we're looking at 7.8 gigs, which you already don't have access to right off the bat. If you have the 128GB model, well, that's not super significant. But if you have the 32GB model, that's almost a quarter of your storage gone, and you're left with about 24 gigabytes to play with. But that's not it. The iPad also comes with pre-installed apps that take up about another 4 gigs. So now we're down to 20 gigabytes of free internal storage if you're buying the 32GB model. Now, one thing to consider is whether you actually need those apps. So for example, GarageBand takes up 1.7 gigs and iMovie is another 603 megabytes. So by removing GarageBand, iMovie, Numbers, Keynotes, and Pages, I was able to free up an additional 3.7 gigs of storage. Now, each one of you will need to decide whether you need those apps, but I mostly use Google Drive and Docs, so I installed those instead. Now, some of you may choose to use Microsoft Office, and again, you'll be able to delete the apps that you don't need. And for an idea of size, Word, Excel, and PowerPoint will take up about 1.5 gigs before you start adding any documents. All right, now that we have an idea of how much internal storage we have to work with, let's talk about how you plan on using your iPad. Now, if you're mostly using it for entertainment, where you're browsing the web, you're using it to read, watch YouTube, Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, or even things like taking notes for school, you'll probably be fine with the 32GB model. And later on, let's talk about what you may want to spend that money on. Now let's talk about some things that will take up space on your iPad and may move you to a category of someone who would benefit from the 128 model. The first question is, do you plan on shooting a lot of photos, or even more important, video with this iPad? The iPad 8 has an 8-megapixel rear-facing camera that's capable of shooting video at up to 1080p at 30 frames per second. And while this isn't a 4K camera, you'll be surprised at how quickly you can fill up space when you're shooting video. So if that's something that you plan on doing, I encourage you to go with the 128GB model. In some of my previous videos, you may have heard me say that I use an external SSD to store media so that I don't fill up my iPad. Now, the good thing here is that it's a lot cheaper. So I use the Samsung T7, which is arguably one of the best options. And I paid $80 for 500 gigabytes. And it's an SSD, so it's extremely fast. It's tiny, so I can bring it along and it's not really a big deal. And I can use it with any of my laptops or desktops as well. But there's a problem with this SSD and the other less expensive Pioneer that I use if you plan on editing photos and videos. The iPad currently can't reference files that aren't stored internally. So if you want to edit photos in Lightroom or edit video in LumaFusion, you'll have to copy those files onto the iPad first. Now, that's not a big deal if you're editing in 1080p, but it may mean that you need to remove those files from the iPad when you're finished with the project. Now, if you plan on editing 4K video that you shot with another camera, then you're much more likely to need the 128 gigs, depending on how many clips you're working with. Now, with every SSD that I used, you can preview your video files in LumaFusion while they're still on the SSD. But when you select a small portion of the clip and then put that in your timeline, the iPad will copy the entire file over, meaning that if you have a 3-minute clip and you're only using 5 seconds of it, it will take up the same amount of space as if you were using the entire 3 minutes in your timeline. I did find one way to work around that, and I'll create a dedicated video for that. So if you're interested, hit the subscribe and notification buttons. All right, so what about if you don't plan on editing videos? What are some other items that may fill up your iPad? One thing to consider is how much music you plan on putting on the iPad. Now, most people already have their music on their phone or they're using a stream service for music, but honestly, even if you plan on storing songs locally so that you can play them without Wi-Fi, that's unlikely to put a significant hit on your storage space. Now, movies are something completely different. Again, if you're always streaming from Netflix, Amazon Prime, or some other similar services, that's not really a big deal. You only need to download the apps themselves, which aren't going to be too big. Now, if you want to download movies and store them on the iPad for offline viewing, for example, if you're in an area with no Wi-Fi or you have the cellular model but you don't have an unlimited data plan, then you'll need to take a closer look. Standard definition or high def movies can range somewhere between 1 to 6 gigabytes each. TV shows, while obviously smaller, have multiple episodes, so if you plan on downloading an entire season, you'll need adequate space. Now, for example, when we travel with our kids, they always download movies to have in the car, at the airport, or on the plane. So having that additional storage is always useful. Now, one of the things that you probably heard me talk about in my other videos is just how powerful the iPad 8 is. The A12 Bionic chip is the same chip used in the iPhone XS, and as the capabilities of even the entry-level models are expanded, developers are able to take advantage and develop more sophisticated apps which take up more space. Now, one category in particular is games. And depending on which games you like to play, we're looking at some pretty big numbers. PUBG Mobile, for example, takes up 3.13 gigabytes. And Call of Duty takes up 3.84 gigs. So that's 7 gigabytes right there. But you can see that if you're only playing a few titles, you're still likely to be okay with the 32 gig model. It just means that you can't download a lot of these games at the same time and try to edit videos. Now, before I move on to who should get which model, if you like what you've seen so far and have gotten value from this video, let me know by giving it a thumbs up. It helps the video and the channel, and it lets me know what kind of content you like so that I can make more of it. And if it's your first time here, hit the subscribe and notification buttons so you can stay up to date on all the latest gear and tutorials. All right, so who should get the 32 gig iPad 8 and who should get the 128? If you're a casual user, if you're using it to stream movies and music, if you're using it for school, to take notes, write papers, browse the web, do research, and even play games, you should be fine with the 32 gig model. And still, if you end up shooting a lot of photos or video, it may mean that you need to offload them to a cloud-based solution or to an external hard drive, but that's not a big deal. If on the other hand, you're a more demanding user and you plan on editing a lot of photos or videos, you plan on downloading a lot of movies for offline viewing, or you play a lot of games, again, where you want a large number of titles all available to you at the same time, then the 128 gig model is probably a better choice for you. One other perspective that I want you to think about is that the iPad 8 is super capable, so there's no real reason that it won't be a great device for at least 3 to 4 years from now. So to the best of your ability, try to anticipate whether your current requirements are likely to drastically change over the next couple of years. Personally, like I said, I picked up the 128 gig model because I do plan on editing video and I wanted to be able to do some more demanding tests for some future videos. I'll put links in the description to where you can buy both the 32 and the 128 gig models of the iPad 8, as well as some of my favorite accessories. And I'll also put a link to the iPad playlist in case you want to check out some other videos. I think that regardless of which model you end up going with, you should pick up a case. Right now I'm playing with a couple of options from ESR. I'm not super careful, so I'm very likely to drop my iPad if I don't have it in a case. I actually never have it naked like this unless I'm shooting a video. It's always in some sort of case, so check these out, and again, I'll put some links in the description. I really hope I was able to give you a good overview of the different iPad 8 sizes or help you figure out which one is right for you. And if I did, please let me know by giving this video a thumbs up, tweet it, share it, and if you haven't yet, join the community by hitting the subscribe and notification buttons. You can always find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Tech Gear Talk. You know what I always say, buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon.